The church smelled like lilies and cold stone. My heels echoed across the marble as I approached the podium. Ethan's photo smiled back at me from the easel, calm, still, forever gone. I was about to speak to honor my husband, but then I felt her lean in. Sloane, her perfume was sharp citrus and cruelty. She didn't look at me, just whispered, "You were never good enough for him." My hands gripped the paper tighter. My chest didn't rise. Time didn't move. Have you ever been insulted at your lowest moment? Where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. My name is Celeste Monroe. I'm 38, a freelance interior designer based in Charleston. I built my career with sweat instinct and clients who didn't care where I went to school, only that their spaces felt like home. That's probably the first reason the Caldwells hated me. I wasn't a legacy. I wasn't bred for Ethan. Ethan and I met at a gallery launch. He was the polished one in a navy suit asking me about my thoughts on negative space. I was the woman with paint on her sleeve and too much eyeliner. And yet for a while it worked. We moved in together in less than a year. Married after 2. Those early days were easy. He cooked better than I did. I brought life to rooms he only saw in blueprints. And when he smiled at me across the kitchen counter, I believed this could last. Then came the first family dinner. Margot, his mother, eyed my thrifted skirt like it might stain her leather seats. Sloane asked what real projects I'd worked on, as if homes only mattered when featured in magazines. Ethan chuckled it off, but his hand never let go of mine under the table. I told myself that was enough. It wasn't. Every holiday, every wedding, every fundraiser I showed up, in dresses I couldn't afford, smiling too wide, nodding at jokes I didn't understand, holding Ethan's hand like it was the last place I belonged. And slowly, it slipped. Ethan stopped defending me. He started saying, "Just let them be. That's how they are." He stopped being between me and them, and started standing slightly behind. Still I stayed, because love is a strange kind of loyalty. You cling harder when you feel it thinning. When Ethan got sick, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see. See who washed the sheets, who tracked his pills, who held his body through night sweats and whispered reassurances when his hands shook. But even then, I wasn't the one they asked about prognosis. They called Margot. Sloane brought gluten-free casseroles she never touched. When Ethan passed, it was a quiet morning. His breath stopped just after sunrise. I was there, forehead to his, whispering that I'd be okay, that he could rest now. I thought grief would unite us. I thought loss would open something in them. Instead, they planned the funeral before his body left the room. I wasn't consulted, just expected to show up. Like I always did. Like a set piece, like a placeholder. I never belonged to the Caldwell family, only to Ethan. And now, not even that. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. The Caldwell brand of cruelty wasn't loud. It was polished, precise. Like their silverware. Like the way Margot pronounced decorator whenever someone asked what I did. She has an eye for color, she'd say, like describing a kindergartner's finger painting. Sloane would add, "Oh, she's so creative. My toddler's the same, always rearranging furniture." Laughter followed, always laughter. I smiled too, because Ethan's hand was on my back, and I told myself that meant something. But soon even that disappeared. At the Caldwell Holiday Gala, Sloane introduced me as Ethan's charming +1 to her law firm's partners. We'd been married 4 years. I looked at Ethan. He just winced. She's being playful. He didn't correct her. He never did anymore. At family dinners, they stopped setting a place card for me. Just Margot, Richard, Sloane, and Ethan at the main table. I sat with the extended cousins' dates' nieces' boyfriends. No one seemed to notice. Not even Ethan. Once I brought Margot a hand-painted vase for her birthday. It matched her sitting room perfectly. She thanked me, then handed it to the maid, whispering, "Put this in the guest bath." Later that night, I heard her praise Sloane's store-bought centerpiece as timeless and tasteful. They never said it directly, that I wasn't one of them, but they didn't have to. It was in the way Margot always called Sloane's ex, Juliet, so refined. In the photos of Ethan's ex-girlfriends still hanging in the hallway, never removed, just framed memories, while mine were tucked into drawers. I asked Ethan once, "Do you even see it the way they treat me?" He looked tired. "Celeste, please. Can't we just get through one evening without making it a thing?" Making it a thing. As if my existence, my pain, was an inconvenience. So I stopped asking, stopped talking, and slowly I disappeared from his defense. From their approval, from the idea of family, I became background. The wife in the holiday card. The one who always offered to help but was never quite included. Until even helping felt like begging, and silence felt like survival. It started with headaches, then the nausea, then the forgetting. Ethan brushed it off, at first blamed stress, jet lag, poor sleep. But one night he collapsed in the hallway. No warning, no noise, just the sound of his body hitting tile. I drove him to the ER barefoot, didn't even grab my wallet. The scan showed a mass. They used the word operable first, then uncertain. Everything blurred after that. Hospital rooms with buzzing lights, doctors speaking in sentences that never ended in hope. I moved into the guest chair beside his bed. I tracked every medication, every calorie, every flicker in his mood. When he vomited blood at 3 a.m., it was my shirt that stained. Not Sloane's, not Margot's. They came, of course they came, but only for the updates, only to adjust optics, to cry in curated doses. Margot brought imported teas he couldn't drink. Sloane posted a filtered photo of his hand in hers captioned, "Family over everything." She never tagged me. They spoke to doctors without me present, made decisions while I went for coffee. Once I returned to find Ethan moved to a different floor, Margot had authorized it for better views. Ethan saw it. He saw how they cut me out. He tried sometimes. "This isn't right," he whispered one night, voice hoarse. "They don't get to erase you." Then he reached for my hand. "I'll fix it. I'll write it down. I want you protected." He meant a new will, a letter, something to undo the erasure they practiced like religion. He even asked Quincy, his oldest friend, to help him draft something, just in case, he'd said. But time ran out faster than he could write. When I asked Sloane about it days later, she smiled like I'd asked about fairy tales. "No one's seen anything official," she said. Poor Ethan. He was so disoriented near the end. Disoriented. Like his love for me was just another symptom. Like his intentions dissolved the moment he did. That was when I knew. They wouldn't just bury Ethan. They'd bury me with him quietly, efficiently, unless I stopped them. The funeral wasn't mine to plan. It was theirs. The Caldwells had already booked the church, selected the music, and printed the programs before I'd even picked a suit for Ethan. They chose the ivory casket. Margot said white felt more noble. They chose the scripture readings. Sloane insisted on a pianist. No one asked me if Ethan even liked piano music. He didn't. I wasn't listed as a speaker. Not at first. Delilah had to call their attorney, remind them I was the legal spouse. They graciously allowed me to say a few words, 5 minutes, between the choir and the slideshow. I sat in the second pew. The first was for immediate family. Sloane looked radiant in black silk. Not a smudge of mascara, not a tremble in her voice as she read from Psalms. But her eyes never once touched mine. Every time someone greeted me, it was with confusion. "Oh, you must be his wife," as if they expected someone taller, softer, someone more Caldwell. The church was cold that morning, smelled of lilies and old marble. Even the candles felt formal. When the usher nodded for me to approach the altar, my hands were already shaking, the folded paper in my palm damp with sweat. I walked past pews, filled with people who never really knew us, past framed photos of Ethan as a boy, a teen, a graduate. None of us on our wedding day. None of me. I reached the podium, opened my mouth, and that's when I felt her. Sloane. She leaned in, smiling for the guests, her voice a whisper laced with venom and citrus perfume. "You were never good enough for him." I didn't flinch, not on the outside, but something split inside me, not like a snap, more like paper tearing down the middle. I gripped the podium tighter, felt my breath freeze, my voice stalled in my throat. They had taken so much, control, credit, space. Now they wanted to take my goodbye too. I looked out at the pews, saw Margot dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief, Sloane clasping her hands like a saint. I inhaled, held the air in my chest like armor, and I began to speak. Not for them, not for peace, but for Ethan, and for the woman he had loved even if his family never did. The reception after the funeral was held at the Caldwell estate. Of course it was. I didn't go. I stood outside the church for a long time, watching the guests drift toward black SUVs and silent chauffeurs. Then I walked. No heels, just pavement. I ended up at the park near East Bay, where Ethan once made me laugh until I spilled cider all over his coat. The wind was sharper now, but I sat on our old bench, fingers numb, eyes dry. That's where Quincy found me. He approached quietly, a man used to witnessing pain without crowding it. In his hand, a cream envelope worn at the edges. "He made me promise," he said, voice low, "only if something felt unfinished." He didn't explain further, just placed the envelope in my lap and walked away. I held it like it might explode. My name was written in Ethan's handwriting, slanted, neat, familiar. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a printed draft of a will, unsigned but detailed. Ethan had intended to leave 40% of his estate to me, including the Savannah condo we'd picked together. A USB labeled C, in case I fail you. A handwritten note. If you're reading this, I didn't move fast enough. I'm sorry, Celeste. They always tried to speak over you, erase you, but I see you. I always did. I know what they'll say, but this is the truth I didn't get to say out loud. Please don't let them rewrite us. I don't remember crying. I remember wind. I remember pressing the note to my chest like it might make the pain more bearable. It didn't. That night I opened the USB. It had folders, bank transfers, voice memos. One file was labeled Quincy Delilah Backup. He had been preparing for this, not just for dying, but for the battle that would come after. He knew his family, knew what they'd try. And now I did too. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about identity, about dignity, about whether a woman like me had the right to be seen, really seen by a legacy like theirs. They thought Ethan died with his silence, but he left me something louder. Proof. Now the only question was, what would I do with it? I sat alone in our bedroom that night, the one with the navy walls Ethan painted because I once told him dark blue felt safe. The candle on the nightstand flickered against the silence. That kind of silence that isn't empty but full. Full of everything I hadn't said for years. Everything I'd swallowed to keep the peace. To protect him, to protect myself. The first time Ethan brought me to meet his family, I wore a dress that cost half my rent. I practiced my smile in the mirror. I memorized their bios, their preferences, their whines. I wanted so badly to belong. Now 7 years later, I'd been erased from my own goodbye. My husband buried without my name spoken once in tribute. But he hadn't forgotten me. He left me the only thing stronger than their disdain, the truth. And suddenly I realized they didn't just want Ethan dead. They wanted their version of Ethan to live clean, curated, obedient to the Caldwell name. In that version, I never existed. I looked down at his note one more time. Don't let them rewrite us. No, I wouldn't. Not now, not quietly. I opened my laptop, opened a blank document, typed one word at the top, plan. The first step was Delilah. Not just my best friend, but a corporate attorney with a spine made of iron. She read through Ethan's unsigned will in silence. Then she looked up. They've already filed for probate using a previous version, she said. The one that names Margot as primary beneficiary. Of course they had. Delilah tapped her pen twice. Ethan's draft isn't legally binding, but combined with the USB contents and a sworn affidavit from Quincy, it becomes something very hard to ignore. We built a folder, physical and digital, each labeled meticulously. Timeline of Ethan's illness, transfers from joint to private accounts. Messages between Sloan and the family lawyer hinting at streamlining post-mortem obligations. I found one email that made my stomach turn. She'll grieve, but grief fades. Assets don't. Sloan to Margot 5 days before Ethan died. Still, I said nothing. Let them believe I'd folded. Let them plan the asset distribution meeting like it was a mere formality. Let them book the law firm's boardroom and bring catered lunch. Let them sit smug in their tailored black like they were grieving royalty. Delilah drafted a motion to challenge the will. We timed its submission for the morning of the meeting so it would land right as they poured their lattes. But that wasn't enough. I didn't want just a legal win. I wanted them to look me in the eye when the illusion shattered. To know it was me, the woman they erased, who put the truth back on the record. So I planned a reveal. Simple, elegant, undeniable. A short video Ethan had recorded weeks before his final decline, stored on the USB. In it, he spoke to the camera, to them, to me. I know what you'll say, he said, that I was confused, that I didn't mean it. But I do. Everything she's done for me, everything you tried to discredit, deserves to be remembered. I watched it only once. Then I saved it to a fresh drive. Labeled it for the boardroom. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I'd let Ethan speak. And this time they'd have no choice but to listen. The boardroom smelled like lemon polish and entitlement. Margot sat at the head of the table, Sloan to her left. Their lawyer, Mr. Dalton, looked like he had just stepped off a yacht. I was directed to a seat across from the caterer's coffee trays. No greeting, no eye contact. Just stiff nods. This will be brief, Dalton began. He opened a folder thick with printed pages, not one of them mine. Margot adjusted her pearl cufflinks. Sloan sipped her oat milk latte like it was champagne. They moved quickly. Ethan's previously validated will, the full estate under family control, assets consolidated for security. I didn't speak, not yet. Dalton passed me a document to sign. Acknowledgement of distribution, legal surrender. He slid a pen towards me, polished, effortless. I looked at it, then looked up. I won't be signing that, I said. Calm, clear. Dalton blinked. Margot's smile faltered. Sloane raised one eyebrow. Oh, she said, you're contesting what Ethan clearly intended. No, I replied. I'm restoring it. From my bag, I pulled the flash drive, plugged it into the presentation screen beside the table. Dalton moved to object, but Delilah, seated beside me, now raised her hand. Let's hear from Ethan, she said, directly. The screen came to life. Ethan appeared, pale, tired, but unshaken. He looked straight at them. If you're watching this, I'm gone. And if you're still trying to cut Celeste out, stop. She was my choice, my home, my partner. The best part of me, and this family treated her like a placeholder. I'm asking you to remember what I couldn't say loud enough in time. Don't erase her, because she's the only thing that ever kept me honest. Silence. Margot stared, frozen. Sloane's hand gripped her pen until her knuckles turned white. Delilah stood, placed the folder in front of Dalton. This contains corroborating evidence, bank transfers, witness statements, a timeline. We're filing for injunction. I didn't look at them again. Didn't need to. Ethan had said what needed saying. In their room, on their turf, with their rules. Only this time the truth was ours. They didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. The room felt colder after Ethan's voice faded, like even the walls had flinched. Sloane was the first to react. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. That video could have been made months ago, she snapped. He wasn't of sound mind. You can't seriously think. Delilah interrupted. Timeline is corroborated by metadata, doctor's records, and third-party witnesses. And we've already filed to halt any distribution until this is reviewed in court. Margot looked pale, not angry, just cornered. She reached for her pearls like they might explain this away. Ethan was vulnerable. He didn't know what he was saying. I looked her in the eyes. He knew. He knew you'd say exactly that. Dalton quietly closed his folder. The meeting was over. That night the video was leaked. Not by me, not by Delilah, but someone in the firm, likely disgusted, sent it anonymously to a local journalist who had once profiled Ethan as Charleston's rising logistics mind. By morning, it was everywhere. Widow fights to honor late husband's final wishes. Family dispute over estate reveals hidden truth. I didn't comment, didn't need to. The clip of Ethan saying, "She was my home," had already gone viral. Even strangers were defending me in comment sections. For the first time, people didn't ask me, "What was it like marrying into the Caldwells?" They asked, "How are you holding up, Celeste?" Sloane posted a vague statement, "Our family is going through a difficult time. We ask for privacy," then limited comments. Margot sent me an email, short, no apology, just, "I hope you do what you feel is right. Ethan, loved you." I didn't understand it then. I didn't reply. Understanding wasn't enough. Not anymore. The probate hearing was quiet but swift. The judge recognized the weight of the supplemental materials. Margot's team negotiated a new division. I walked away with my rightful share and with my name cleared. But more than that, I walked away with my truth intact. No more being framed out of family photos. No more introductions as his +1. No more rooms I didn't belong in. I kept Ethan's note in a drawer beside my bed. Not because I needed proof anymore, but because I liked remembering the version of him that fought for me in the end. He didn't finish the battle, but he gave me the sword. 2 months later, I stood in a small studio I'd leased on King Street, painted the walls dark blue, hung sketches he used to love. The name above the door, Monroe & Monroe, Design and Legacy. Some days are still hard. Grief is strange. It shows up with the mail, with the smell of his cologne on a passing stranger. But it no longer comes with shame. And every now and then I hear someone say my name, not like I don't belong, but like I always did, like I earned it. And that is enough. The weeks that followed moved like honey, slow, sticky, unpredictable, but not bitter. Margot's social circle thinned quickly. The DAR removed her name from the speaker roster. Donors politely postponed meetings. Sloane lost a major client at her PR firm. Apparently, a whisper of inheritance manipulation doesn't look great in a media pitch. Quincy texted me one day. For once, the truth made better headlines than the lie. I didn't celebrate, but I did breathe, deeply, for the first time in months. Strangers sent cards, some from as far as Maine and Albuquerque. Women wrote, "I was erased by my husband's family too. Thank you for standing up." A florist near the courthouse delivered a bouquet of wild peonies anonymously. The note said, "For the one who didn't stay silent." The house Ethan and I shared sat empty for weeks. I couldn't step inside without hearing the beep of his key fob. or the sound of his cough echoing off the kitchen tiles. But one rainy afternoon I walked in. No umbrella, just the smell of wet magnolia and memory. I packed in silence, not to forget, but to start over on my own terms. The studio I opened became more than a business. It became a map of the life I'd rebuilt. One corner held client renderings, another shelves with candles I poured by hand, and on the far wall a framed sketch Ethan had drawn of me once half finished. I hung it not for him, but for me, to remember the version of myself he saw when even I had forgotten. I started wearing red again, the bold kind, the kind Margot once called a bit loud. I painted one wall in the studio aubergine, deep and unapologetic. Every woman who walked in said the same thing. I don't know why I love this color, but I do. And I smiled, because I knew why. I don't visit Ethan's grave often. He's not there. Not really. He's in the chair I still keep by the window, in the recipe card for the sweet potato pie he never quite perfected, in the playlist that still starts with our song even when I hit shuffle. One afternoon, as I locked up the studio, a young intern stopped me. She looked nervous, clutching a notebook, cheeks pink. "Miss Monroe," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you for existing publicly." I didn't understand at first. Then she added, "You made space for women like me, who didn't grow up knowing how to be accepted, but now believe we deserve to be." She didn't ask for anything, just smiled, and walked away. I stood there, the key in my hand, heart heavier than usual, but not in a bad way. In a way that said, this mattered. When Ethan's video ended that day in the boardroom, I thought that was the final word. But I was wrong. The final word was mine. And I wrote it not with fury, but with a life lived fully, on my own terms, in my own name, with no need to prove my worth to anyone who couldn't see it, because now the whole world could. Some people think justice feels like fireworks, loud, explosive, dramatic. But for me, it felt like light through old curtains, slow, soft, but finally reaching places long forgotten. I didn't need revenge. Not really. I needed clarity, and I got it in Ethan's words and the silence that followed in the life I've built since. People still ask me, would you do it again? And I always say, absolutely, but sooner. Because sometimes the cost of staying quiet is greater than any fallout from telling the truth. I used to believe healing came after forgiveness. Now I know healing comes when you stop asking people to see you and start seeing yourself. Ethan loved me, even when he didn't say it loud enough, even when he failed to fight soon enough. But in the end, he handed me the mic, and I used it, not to scream, not to shame, but to speak. And that made all the difference. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by a family, a lover, a legacy, know this. You're not the problem. You were never the problem. And your story matters. Even if you have to be the one to write it. Where in the world are you listening from? Have you ever had to stand alone to defend your worth? Tell me in the comments, and if this story moved you, subscribe to hear more true tales of betrayal, justice, and reclaiming who we are. Because silence isn't strength. Truth is.